Well, I think everybody has known I've been fighting this, getting this Homelite Super XP1020 automatic running for a while. Had recoil issues. The saw sat for a long time. It faded out. I don't know where it sat at, but maybe in the sun, I don't know. But inside it is in pretty darn good shape, like it hadn't been used a long time. Something happened with the recoil. They busted up the housing because it was catching. It wasn't catching on the starter cup, so they busted the housing, and then they left it set, it looks like. Well, I made the classic mistake of not looking at the first and most obvious problem, and that was the carburetor. Carburetor was trashed. Well, trashed, I say. It was just gummed up. I mean, just full of, when the gasoline evaporates from the oil in it, it turns to a kind of a grease-like substance, and that's what I found in here, completely greased up. The biggest problem was removing this rod right here. And this rod goes right in here, and that holds the metering lever down. But that dude, I had to hold a propane torch on that for at least 3 minutes, and I almost boogered that up. I cleaned it up a little bit, but I almost busted that head on that, but getting it out. But I can save it. I got a new kit coming from it. But this little dude right here, they say take a thin-walled 7/16, well, they don't sell one, I don't think. To get that out, that's where the needle sits. So I had an old set of socket drivers, and I took it on a grinder, and I ground that thing down to where it was thin. So it's no longer a thick wall, it's a thin wall, but that was able to pull that out of here, right here, that hole. Without that, you can't do it. So I'm just waiting on the kit, and I've got to take that apart and clean that, but I'll soak all this and get this all cleaned up. Yeah, you can see that needle is not so good, and I've cleaned a lot of this, but there was just like a jelly in here of old oil. But then I'm also working on a 1942 Mosin Nagant, and I've got a black Monte Carlo stock for it, and a bipod, and a really neat. You take the rear side off and you put a Piccaninny rail on it for a scope mount for a long eye relief scope, which that's about the only scope that'll fit on these because of the recoil, or hold on to it, stay onto it. So I'll have a 7x44 scope on this 28-inch barrel somewhere near there. And I was going to sell this and buy a semi-automatic battle rifle, but gosh, I was going to look at spending $900 to $1,000 on something decent or more, and I already had a couple thousand rounds of this, so I said, well, I'll turn this into a more modern rifle. It's a bolt action, it's a straight shooter, and with $250 worth of upgrades on the bipod, the scope, and the scope mount, I've got me a good shooter, a pretty simple Russian 7.62 by 54R rifle. Nothing wrong with that. Well, on to chainsaws.